Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Hopium Chronicles. Simon Rosenberg here, my new political home on Substack. And we, as part of being a member of this community, you get access to regular events every month. This is the monthly hangout with me, where we get to talk politics and take questions and have a conversation. If you become a paid subscriber, you get even more. I mean, if you need more, even more Hopium, you can get it. And so consider tonight, if you're not a paid subscriber, just $45 a year can really help fund the research and work that we do here. Let me start by saying, first of all, that as I like to say, many of you have heard me talk before, that I think every time we start one of these gatherings, we think about politics, we get up in the morning, we have our coffee. I want us to start with these three phrases. Joe Biden is a good president. The country is better off. The Democratic Party is strong. I think last cycle we got very down and got into a defensive crouch. And I think this cycle we should be on offense and being aggressive and trying to get more and expand our coalition rather than being defensive, because Joe Biden has been a good president. The country is better off and our party is really strong. And it's really exciting to start the cycle in this kind of sense of optimism and offense. As I often do in these, I try to ground, before I talk about today, I want to ground our conversation tonight in what happened in 2022, because it's still so important for understanding the current moment. In 2022, there were two elections. There was a bluer election inside the battleground and a redder election outside the battleground. Inside the battleground, we did miraculous things as a party. We gained ground over 2020 in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. We got to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55% in Michigan, 54% in New Hampshire. We just got to 56% in Wisconsin, in an election that was supposed to be a terrible election for us. Our grassroots raised unprecedented amounts of money. Our campaigns outraised the Republicans in many of the battleground states and districts by 4, 5, 6 to 1. It allowed us to control the information environment. And because of all the work that you do now over Zoom and texting and postcards and phone calling and all the things you can do, we pushed our performance on the ground in GOTV grassroots to the upper end of what was possible. We actually outperformed our 2018 and 2020 numbers in the early vote. And this is something we'll talk about in a little bit. A really remarkable performance. And so, whatever you think happened in 2022, it was an extraordinary election. It may have been the most remarkable performance of the last three, which have all gone very well for us in 2018, 2020, and 2022, because of the midterm dynamic, because of the high inflation and low Biden approval. We demonstrated unbelievable muscle and capacity in the most important states that are going to determine 2024. But outside the battleground, we fell back in California and in Florida and Texas and in New York, which was a reminder that they're still very loud and they're louder than we are, that they still control too much of the daily discourse, and that we need to not, as we head forward into 2024, we need to not only continue to run these big muscular campaigns that all of you have helped us build, but we need to get louder and we need to close the loudness gap with the Republicans. It's really important that we become far more intentional as a family about being loud every day and about not making it harder for them to bully us and push us around in the daily discourse. I have this way I talk about this, which is that I think we have to reimagine the war room. I worked in the war room 31 years ago. And when you think of the war room in your mind's eye, you think of like 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bulls, producing rapid response videos. But what the war room really needs to be today in the modern age, in the social media age, is 1 million people, proud patriots who love their country, getting up every day and reaching 5, 10 of their friends through whatever way is comfortable for you, to help us be louder. Because, Tucker Carlson in his heyday reached 3 million people a night. If 1 million people can reach 10 people each, that's 10 million people. That's a lot more than Tucker. And I think that we have much more agency and power to take back control of the daily discourse in the United States than we understand. And I'm giving all of you permission tonight to become information warriors for your democracy. And we can talk more about that. But this very strong overperformance that we saw in 2022 in the key states that really mattered, and when we focused and took our grassroots and pointed it somewhere, has continued in 2023. We had incredible victories in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, where we got all the way up to 56% with a Republican-held Supreme Court seat that may play an instrumental role in the ending up making sure that we win the election in 2024. In Colorado Springs and Jacksonville, Florida, two Republican cities, we took those cities back. In Colorado Springs, our candidate is a Nigerian immigrant in a historically Republican city. We also won a very important special in Pennsylvania just a few months ago. And so, we continue to grow and expand our coalition and do things that people didn't think were possible. And that trend has continued. And we're even seeing it now, in the early polling in Ohio, which is the next sort of big place that this band of patriots have to go do our work and make sure we win on August 8th, where there's a special election in Ohio connected to a ballot initiative that's going to come in November on abortion. And we'll come back to that all in a minute. But in terms of where we are now in 2023, I think we've had a really good summer and they've had a really bad summer. We built upon the progress we made in the spring in these elections. And this year, Joe Biden's case for being a good president has been dramatically strengthened. I mean, not only has the economy continued to outperform everyone's expectations and to continue to grow, jobs be created. We've had in just recent months, we have had the lowest peacetime unemployment rate since World War II, the lowest unemployment rate since the late 1960s, meaning that about 2/3 of Americans have never lived in America when the unemployment rate has been this low. We've seen the lowest poverty rate, the lowest uninsured rate in American history. New job formations are at record highs. Worker contentedness today is also breaking records. We've seen the consumer confidence numbers have come way up. Inflation is down, the deficit is down. I mean, the economy is doing unbelievably well. And I think Biden's starting to get a little bit more credit for it. The second thing, though, is on a whole host of issues that Republicans, so the number one area of attack against Biden, right, was on inflation and the economy, and that's gotten so much better. But where the Republicans also came after Biden was on the border. And we've seen now the new border plan the president implemented in the spring is working. The Washington Post had a story this weekend saying the border is eerily quiet and flow to the border has come way down, as was designed and was the goal of the policy. We've seen now data that murder rates all across the country have come way down. And so that was another area where Republicans came after us. Another area Republicans came after us, and this may sound Looney Tunes to people on this call, is the Republicans were arguing that because Joe Biden had strangled domestic energy production, that it increased gas prices, which then increased inflation. And they blamed Joe Biden for inflation and for high gas prices, and not Russia and Saudi Arabia, who are the people that actually raised those prices. And in their construct that they used on Fox News, Biden had waged a war on domestic energy. And we now know that this year, there'll be more oil produced in America than any year in American history. We also know that renewables and non-fossil based production will set records. And so this whole idea of his war on energy was also been debunked, or it's evaporated. And so many of the core central talking points that Republicans have been using over the last 6 to 9 months against Biden have evaporated. And my line is that Joe Biden's had a good summer. Republican talking points have had a really bad summer. And it means that his case for reelection has gotten so much stronger since even last fall. And I left out Russia. I mean, there are many other things, the revitalization of the West. I mean, there's a whole list of things that we all have. We've seen the beginning of the impact of the huge investments he's making. We're seeing real concrete investments in the United States that's driving job creation, fueling the economy, as we all hope, but it's happening now. It's not happening 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So much is going right in this country, and we're getting to the other side of COVID and all the things that we had all hoped and that Joe Biden promised, right, when he ran. And so I think our position has strengthened. And the good news is we're starting to see it pick up in polling. And we haven't had a lot of polling. I mean, part of what happened in 2022 is there wasn't a lot of high quality polling. Polling's gotten much more expensive. It's hard to reach people. And so polling's gotten more expensive. And so we're getting less of it. And so there's more opportunity for junk polling to influence the discourse. That's part of what went wrong in 2022. But in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of high quality independent media polls, large sample polls, and they're all pointing in the same direction, which is that Biden is now leading Trump by 3 or 4 points. I feel good about where we are. DeSantis, who I was worried about, the old Ron DeSantis from a year ago worried me. The new, more extreme and malevolent Ron DeSantis, we're seeing crater in the polls. I mean, the last week, he's probably had the worst round of press, that I've seen in a candidate in a long time. And so our thing is going really well, right? We're winning elections, we're governing well. We're seeing early good data coming out of Ohio, for example. So we should feel good about where we are. Let's look at them for a second, right? An historical mess. I mean, we could use such much more extreme language to describe them, right? But their president, the guy who's at 50, 60% of the vote now, and in the Morning Consult poll today, Trump was at 59%. They look the other way when he gets convicted for sexually assaulting a woman. They look the other way when he gets caught stealing America's secrets, lying to the FBI about it. They look the other way when he leads an insurrection that involves hundreds of Republican officials from all over the country, and where he's about to be indicted for. They look the other way on things that are betrayals of the country. I mean, leading an insurrection is the most serious political crime in a democracy one could imagine. And yet it's all okay. He's still their leader. But it's not okay for voters who are outside of the core Republican base. And it's why I think that the cumulative impact of all of this is going to be an enormous drag on Trump. It's going to be the drag on the Republicans, even if Trump somehow doesn't become the nominee. I think the other big drag that will play out for the Republicans in the next 16 months is going to be Ron DeSantis's Florida. I think the mess and the craziness that he's brought to Florida is something we're going to be able to run on, regardless of who the nominee is. And so I think while we're doing well and we've governed well and Joe Biden's been a good president, they've been historically awful, and they've given us such material to use to push them to remind this anti-MAGA majority that has shown up in such large numbers in the battlegrounds, to remind them that this is the same people they've been voting against in the last 3 elections. And so I would much rather be us than them as we head into 2024. In terms of the things that we need to be doing now, right, before the Biden campaign really starts to kick into gear and the House and Senate races are, starting to occupy people's attention and work, I think there are a few things we need to do in 2023 to make 2024 the election we want it to be. First of all, we need to be loud and proud about Joe Biden's presidency and sell his economic accomplishments. We know from data that the only real way Republicans are connecting with voters right now is through the economy. They've got an advantage over us in the economy. We need to close that gap. We need to get into positive territory. We need to take that away from them strategically. If we can become the party that's more trusted in the economy, the Republicans are not going to have a good election next year, and we will. And I think we've got a strong case to make. And I'm encouraging everyone in the Hopium community to do everything they can to learn the data, to amplify the good works of Joe Biden, and to help tell the story. Because we also know from polling, when people hear about what he's done, his approval rating goes way up. People don't know the good things he's done. And when they're informed, which is what campaigns are about, things can improve dramatically for him. So this is work that we know will be effective if we can do it together. The second thing I'm calling on all of us to do is to launch a national youth voter registration drive, or do youth voter registration drives in any way you can in your communities, because we need to make young people the center of all of our politics. It's the future. It's where our majorities come from. We can't accept any longer that the people that vote for us the most vote the least. We've got to change that. It's really important. And I think we can. And we've done a lot of work on that here. We can talk more about that in the Q&A. But then finally, in terms of things we can do, I just announced yesterday that I think there are 3 things I want to encourage our community to do together over the next few months. One is we need to go into Ohio with everything we got now. I was a little slow getting there, a little busy, but I've got David Pepper, the famous former party chair of Ohio, coming in to speak to us on Thursday. I need all of you to sign up for a shift of phone calls, texting, do your postcards. If you're in Ohio, canvass. This is a big one. We know from data, and I shared this today, that we can, that the Vote No effort, the special election, that we can win it if we get the turnout we want. And we know that we can also win the abortion ballot initiative in November. It will be a huge blow to the Republicans. And as the Washington Post story that I shared today reminded us, is that when we put the abortion issue on the ballot, the Republican coalition collapses and it breaks apart. And to what a remarkable thing to be able to do that in Ohio as we get ready to defend Sherrod Brown next year. And second thing I hope that we all focus on together is Virginia. We need to win in Virginia. We need to win big in Virginia. It's really important. You know, the escape valve that they have is that somehow Trump steps down a month before the convention and they put someone like Glenn Youngkin in, you know, probably with a moderate Republican woman on the ticket. This is their hope, right? That somehow that all happens. It's hard to see, but it's in the back of their minds. Well, the way that doesn't happen, and the way we take that off the table, is that we run up the score in Virginia. And, you know, we've got a great team of people running the campaigns there. Poor Virginians have to run elections every year, right? Because their state legislative races are in the off year. And I've put materials on our site to begin to get you focused on the work you can do in terms of texting, phoning, postcards, canvassing. There are lots and lots of people. I live in DC. Lots of people here have canvassed many times in Virginia. We need to turn that on. This is a big election. It's got enormous national consequences, and we need to win there. And I'm optimistic that we can. And then the third thing I'm asking people to look at in terms of doing is getting involved in another ballot initiative in Florida. We know there too that that ballot initiative can pass. It can become a vehicle for all the frustration with DeSantis, and it can become a very powerful thing we do together. This is a ballot initiative that would be on the ballot in 2024 during the general election. And if we decide to compete in Florida in the general, this could be very consequential. It's really important. And also the good people of Florida need some good news after having had one of the worst governors in modern American history, you know, wreck their state in the last few months. And so we've got to also show up, I think, for the good people of Florida in this ballot initiative. What they're doing now is they're trying to get signatures, and I put a link in my stuff for you to get more familiar and to get involved. So let me conclude, and I'm happy to open up for questions. That, you know, I feel really good about where we are. My optimism is based on data. It's not based on hopium, right? It's not delusional. It's based on, you know, where things are. I got the election right last time because Tom Bonnier and I, you know, expanded the data set that we were looking at beyond facile and often very erroneous polling. And all these kinds of measures of fundraising, all these ways we look at intensity, right? The strong performance we had in Colorado Springs and in Florida and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the money that we're out raising the Republicans again. You know, all these indicators of intensity are pointing in the right direction. They're pointing towards us. And what it means for me, and if I could wave my Simon magic wand, my Harry Potter magic wand in this final point, is that what I hope all of you take away from everything I'm talking about tonight is that they're historically awful and we've been historically good. And I think that we need to think about this election not being an election where we stumble across the finish line and win by a few points, but we need to try to get to 55. We need to try to blow this thing out. We need to try to win by 10 points. We need to have an intentionality about that, right? We need to try to win as big as we can. Why? Because if this election is about a clear repudiation of MAGA, finally, it will start to loosen MAGA's dark grip on the Republican Party and give people like Liz Cheney and Bill Kristol and others a competitive chance to reclaim their party and make it something like a traditional center-right party again. Because we all want to go back to our lives. We don't want to be here with Simon and doing all this grassroots work. We're doing it all because we're scared for our country. And we're worried that if we stumble in an election, then our democracy could slip away. And I think we all don't want to feel that anymore. And the only way we're really going to get there is if we blow this election out and make it a clear and profound repudiation of the direction the Republican Party has taken. I can tell you from data, and I've written about this on our site, that we can do this. And let me give you two examples. So in 1992 to 2004, we averaged 47% of the vote in those four elections. And then I and others identified new coalitions. We did strategy and we did number crunching and we did analysis. And we saw that millennials and Hispanics were beginning to come into the electorate in very large numbers. And if we focused our politics on them, we could expand our coalition. And in the four elections since that happened, we've averaged 51%. We jumped 4 points. And 51% over four elections, the last time we did that was in the 1930s and 1940s. So we're in the middle of one of the best presidential runs in the modern history of the Democratic Party, or since the 1930s and 40s. We are the majority party. And now what I'm saying is I think we have to look at data again and look at coalitions and figure out how to get to 55. And to me, it's starting with young people, but it's also the politics of abortion. It's also the never Trump or never MAGAs. It's also, getting a few points back with Hispanics. There's a lot of ways we can get there, but it's got to be an expansion mindset, a growth mindset, recognizing they're abandoning real estate that we can go take away from them, and that we need to, for the good of the country, we need to get to 55. This is not just about winning. This is about ending MAGA's dark grip on the Republican Party. That's what we have to hope. And I think we can do this together. And I think the performance that we had in the battleground states, the performance we've seen this year, strong early numbers coming out of Ohio, we're positioned to not just win in this election, gang, but to win big. And it's a change in mindset in the way that Democrats, who often get very consumed with all the concerns that they have, it's not about concerns. It's about we're strong and we're going to go take this to them and we're going to win this thing and we're going to win big and we're going to work really hard. We're going to work harder than we've ever worked, because what's in front of us is this ability to end MAGA. That's where I think we are right now. That's why this is an exciting time. I'm grateful that all of you are here. Let me first go to some written questions. And Annie, thanks for starting with the Network Nova sessions are too bad. The Network Nova is a grassroots organization in Northern Virginia that does remarkable work, and I spoke at their big annual Women's Summit this past weekend with Tim Kaine and lots of other people. It was an amazing event, and Network Nova folks are involved here with the Hopium community too. Let me just say that I'm going to get a lot of questions about third party, and let me address that, because I didn't address that in my comments. I'm not that worried about third party candidates right now, rogue party candidates, whatever you want to call them, rogue candidates. I think the answer to all of them is we just have to build up Joe Biden and run up the score and make this election so successful that we don't have to worry about them. I mean, that's literally the way we have to think about this, right? Which is that we shouldn't be worrying about them. There's not much we can really do about it. We should be worrying about how much work we're doing to make sure it doesn't really matter. I also will say that I think, you're seeing Robert Kennedy's performance on the trail has been ridiculous. He's stumbling all over the place. His numbers have come way down. I do think you have to think of Robert Kennedy as a candidate that the Republicans are playing with just as a potential running mate for Trump. He's not running in the Democratic primary. He's not going to the early primary states. He's not going on traditional media outlets. He's not speaking to Democrats at all. He's speaking only to Republicans. And based on polling right now, he's got like a 2-to-1 negative in the Democratic primary audience. He's got a 2-to-1 positive in the Republican primary audience. So what I've been told by people that are around him and know him, that there is this idea that they can run as a unity bipartisan ticket, Trump and Kennedy, and try to pull off a miracle. I think it's absurd, because he's such a terrible and ridiculous candidate, and I'm not worried about it. And I think if they try to do it, it actually could be so comical and ridiculous that it may backfire. And I think they're going to see that. I mean, he's flaming out already. I think the no labels thing, I'm not as scared about no labels as many other people. I mean, I've actually, and I was hesitant to say this, but what I've been saying to people, and I've written to some people, is that I thought it's possible that Joe Manchin could actually take away more from Republicans than Democrats, because the Republican coalition is splintered. Our coalition isn't. There isn't a big anti-Biden movement in our coalition. There's a big part of the Republican Party that doesn't like MAGA. And so they've already splintered, right? They're having a hard time keeping their coalition together. And in the first comprehensive poll that's been taken that really tested Manchin, and they pit him with Manchin and Huntsman as and they named him, not an independent moderate, which is a ridiculous way of polling this, but actually named everybody. Manchin got 2%, and he took away more from Republicans and Democrats. And so I'm not convinced yet. And I think one of the things I just want to say to everybody about no labels is I don't think we should talk about them anymore. I think every time we talk about them and say, I'm scared about Joe Manchin, he could change the election, we're building him up. We got to make them look ridiculous. We have to make Joe Manchin, what's in front of Joe Manchin is that he becomes Jill Stein. Joe Manchin doesn't want to be Jill Stein. Joe Manchin wants to be big, strong, and powerful. Joe Manchin has no ability to be big, strong, and powerful unless we give that to him. And because there isn't probably going to be debates next year. And so this idea that he's a third party candidate on the debate stage, being able to make his case, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Trump's going to do it. And so I don't think all of that is real. I'm not convinced. I think the most important part of this third party movement and this rogue candidate or these things challenging the party system is the never Trump or never MAGAs, right? No one's talking about them. They've already proven to be incredibly influential in our elections. They were in 2022. They were in 2020. Imagine if Liz Cheney endorses Biden and campaigns for Biden. If we can bring her into our coalition and bring them into this pro-democracy coalition, then we can get, this is why I think we can get to 55. I think there's a chance if we do our work and all of you in the States make these folks who used to be Republicans or temporarily not Republicans feel welcome at your events and your coalitions. We already saw that, those folks in Arizona and in Colorado and Michigan, Pennsylvania played a meaningful role in our success last election. So that's the part of the third party movement that I think is actually going to be the most consequential. And so, and that will benefit us, obviously. And we need to keep, welcoming all the never Trump or never MAGAs. Imagine what they've had to go through. Imagine seeing your party erode and go crazy as you have. And they're staying in the game. They're doing the work. I'm so proud, frankly, of all those folks as a political professional from Bulwark and from the Lincoln Project and from, Liz Cheney and Bill Kristol and all these folks. I mean, it's incredible what they're doing every day, and they're so credible. And we need to continue to give them a big seat at our table. Let me just see if I can listen. I don't think any of the Republicans have any chance of beating Trump at this point. I don't think Trump, if Trump's up now by 25, 30 points in Iowa. If he wins Iowa, the Republican system is different from ours. In their primary, it's winner take all. So you win by 1 point, you get all the delegates. So it means Trump has to be beaten. It's not like getting close, and no one's close. And none of these candidates are strong enough, talented enough, charismatic enough, interesting enough to challenge him. I mean, this is a weak field. It's an incredibly weak field. All of them are weak. Tim Scott may get his little bump as being the Christian warrior. He's unelectable in the general election, in my view. I just don't think, I think everyone is looking for the alternative. And as they're doing that, Trump's numbers keep going up, right? He's consolidating. And so I just don't think, even with all of his troubles, because remember, there's not going to be an actual trial until May of next year. And long past, if he wins Iowa on January 15th, he's the nominee. And so this question about whether or not there's some divine Zeus-like bolt that comes in that pushes Trump in May, June, July, and pushes him out, and they put in someone, some other candidate, it's completely possible. It's not likely. And so the likely scenario here is Biden and Trump, and we win by 4, 5, 6, 7, hopefully 10 points. I mean, I think I think the baggage he's going to have and the sort of sense of just that he didn't just do bad things, that he betrayed the country serially, it's just too much to overcome. I just don't know how he possibly, because remember, he got 47% of the vote last time, and he's going to lose votes. And so I think it's much more likely that he gets to 45 than he gets to 49 or 50. That's just my view of this. I mean, it's obviously a million things could happen in between now and then. And let me just raise one other issue, because this always comes up. How do we deal with Biden's age? How do we deal with that? Look, it's a major issue. I mean, every candidate has, a balance sheet, assets and liabilities. Everybody does, right? Biden's balance sheet, the assets have gotten a lot more, significant in the last few months. His age is, to me, we have to be straightforward about it and say that, look, those of us who are formerly young know that with age comes not just losing a step, but comes experience and wisdom and capacity. And that having had in these last few years during a tumultuous time, the most experienced person to ever become president in our history was a good thing. And that wisdom and that experience and that age, right, ended up turning out to be of enormous benefit for the country. So I think this is something we can handle, and we shouldn't shy away from it. It's an issue, but we have to sell it. And we also have to recognize that Biden and Trump are almost the same age. So I don't think it's really going to be the kind of issue that Republicans hope. I do think that as their attacks on Biden evaporate, their attacks on him as president evaporate, you're now seeing an escalation of attacks on him as a man and as a father. and as a grandfather, right? I mean, this is where they have to go because the governing attacks as president have evaporated. And you've seen a significant escalation. It's not surprising. I don't think any of us should be surprised. But if they're talking about Joe Biden as man and not Joe Biden as president, we're going to win this election by 10 points. And it's not a winning strategy for them. It's a sign of their desperation. It's a sign of them not having a strong argument against him. So let me just so in New York and California, this comes up in every discussion. We have to do better. And, in New York, there's a project being put in place led by Hakeem Jeffries and others that's going to really focus on winning these House seats that we lost last time. We're going to have better redistricting. We're going to have a redistricting in New York. So we should be able to reclaim some of that lost ground. Same with California. It's going to be an election year. And I think that everyone knows, and the DCCC is very focused on those House districts in California. I think we got caught sleeping a little bit. You can't, in every election, you can't do everything perfectly. You can't get an A+ in the complexity of these elections. And we did so much right in 2022, and the DCCC did such a remarkable job, but they didn't do everything perfectly. And California and New York were unexpected struggles, and it was painful and costly for us. And so we're going to, I think those are being addressed. I feel very good about the current DCCC and the team that's there. I worked there in 2018. I feel like the likely scenario, I didn't discuss this, is that we win the presidency, we flip the House, and then the Senate is up for grabs. I mean, the Senate is going to be hard. We're probably going to lose West Virginia in all likelihood. That gets us to 50. And so, we've got to hold everywhere else. We may not have a pickup opportunity. And so, it's going to be another unbelievably competitive cycle. Our candidates are strong. We're raising lots of money. I put my I'd wager on Sherrod Brown and Jon Tester any day of the week. So, but the Senate is going to be hairy and tough, and we're going to have to fight. I'm more optimistic about us, keeping the House at this point than the Senate. I think the Senate is just a toss-up. I think the House I think we're favored to win it. I am, by the way, somebody just mentioned this. I'm going on James Carville's pod tomorrow. James called me last week. I did work for him in 1992. We had a great chat. I haven't spoken to him in a long time. That will be out within a few days. And we also have, David Pepper, on Thursday live to talk about Ohio. This will be recorded if you want to share it with friends. Every event we do here is always recorded. You can share it with friends. I want to go back. Lori asked, I want to just go back again to this basic premise that if Republicans are doing things like impeaching Biden and talking about Hunter and all the stuff they're doing, they're losing. These are not effective strategies. They're not going to work compared to Donald Trump. I mean, it's just not going to work. You have to look at these things they're doing, all these comical, ridiculous Marx Brother-like, things they're doing on Capitol Hill. All of this stuff is eroding them. It's hurting them. Kevin McCarthy's numbers and the GOP's numbers are terrible on the House. They're much worse than the Democrats. This stuff has backfired on them. Their voters wanted them to go govern and make things better for people. And instead we get these theatrical, the Marx Brothers like, things they're doing. Jim Jordan is a wrecking ball for the Republican brand. All of this stuff, don't be scared by any of this stuff. It's going to backfire on them. This is not where the country wants to go. Let me say something I hadn't really said, and I have to still develop it a little bit more. In 2022, part of the reason we did so well is that people were sensing that we were getting back to something like normal. We're not on firm ground. The fear of COVID is still with us. It's part of the reason I think there's still so much, Joe Biden's not getting more credit for the economy, because I don't think people feel that it's assured and it's still fragile, and that we're not, we're on the other side of COVID. But I think it's going to take 2 or 3 years of being on the other side of COVID for people to really feel that way, right? And not be a little bit scared in the back of their mind. And so I think where people's heads are at is they want to get back to their lives. They want to go coach Little League and make dinners on Sunday nights and hang out with their friends and family again. They don't want chaos. They don't want DeSantis. They don't want Trump. They don't want Looney Tunes. They don't want Jim Jordan. They don't want any of this. They want, slow and steady Joe Biden making the country better, grinding it out every day. And I think the Republicans really have miscalculated about where people's heads are at. And I think part of the big miscalculation that DeSantis went through was they misread the results of the Virginia election in 2021. They believed this was about woke and urban riots and all this other stuff. It was about COVID. I mean, going back to school, I had 3 kids at home three teenagers during COVID lived here in my house, and we survived somehow. But going back to school in 2021 was scary. People were scared. And I think there was a sense that Biden really didn't talk to them enough as the leader of the country about the fear that they had about going back to school and letting their kids go into these scary environments. There didn't seem to be a steady hand on the rudder. And also Afghanistan had happened, which I think also weakened Biden's brand. The Republicans then interpreted all this as being about all this other stuff. And it's not working, right? The book banning is among the most unpopular things in the country. You look at polling about woke. I mean, woke, when you ask the question, is it like good or bad? Does it mean that you care about your fellow citizens or you have this ideological whatever, right? Plurality of voters believe it's good. A majority of voters in some polls believe it's good. The number of people who believe this, like it's indoctrination and all this stuff, it's in the 20s and 30s. This is a losing issue for the Republicans. On the issue of schools and what parents want out of schools, you know what is the number one issue in virtually every poll? They don't want their kids to get shot at school. And the number of people that worry about indoctrination, right-wing, leftist indoctrination is in the teens and 20s. What's in the 50s is I want my kid to come home from school every day. And the Republicans are really on the wrong side of that one. And so we often get spooked by these right-wing memes. We get pushed around by their bluster and the media sort of being complicit and spreading their negative sentiment into our discourse every day. And it's why it's so important that we get up every day and we don't go and start our day by going where they are, right? The war room in 1992 wasn't about responding to them. It was about winning the information war every day. It was about making our case. And I think for Democrats, I have an exercise I do for those of you who've seen this, which is Joe Biden has been a good president, period. The country is better off, period. The Democratic Party is strong, period. No comma, no semicolon, no however, no buts. I mean, I was on a call with a reporter today, and I was doing my rap about us being strong and polling. He said, "But, Simon." I said, "No, there's no buts. There's no but. All that is true. And then these other things can be true. But there's not a but, there's not a negation, there's not a taking away of the truth of the first piece." And what happens, I think, what I've learned from these conversations I've been having with all of you over the last year or so, is that Democrats immediately go to the but and the however. And when you do that, Joe Biden's been a good president, but Simon, when you do that, you're bringing MAGA talking points into our discourse. And I want to challenge all of you not to do that anymore. I want to challenge all of you to not take this anxiety you have, these concerns you have, and let it overwhelm all the good things that are happening. Far more is going right in America today than is going wrong. And it doesn't mean I'm not being Pollyannish, right? It doesn't mean we don't pay attention to it. But I don't want anyone to ever share a Marjorie Taylor Greene video ever again. We all know who she is by now, right? It's a waste of our time to dwell in their darkness and we need to spend, much more of our time making the positive case for ourselves and telling our story. We don't have to tell their story. They're really good at that. We have to tell our story. This is a discipline thing, right? We have to become more disciplined about how we engage in our daily discourse. It's remarkable to me how oftentimes in these kinds of conversations, the first 10 or 15 questions are, well, that's great, Simon, but I'm concerned about this and I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about it too. But what we need to be doing is not living in concern. We need to be channeling into concrete action, telling our positive stories about the country, because I do think that MAGA's central strategy is to pump negative sentiment into our discourse every day. They want us to feel bad about our country, about our democracy, the American project, our institutions, our leaders, each other. And part of the response to that isn't putting more negative sentiment in, it's putting positive sentiment in. We have to become a positive sentiment machine. as Democrats. And I think we can do this. I think this is actually how we save our democracy, is by becoming positive sentiment warriors, information warriors for our democracy, and not letting them bully us and push us around. Let me go to some other questions. Yeah, I mean, folks, you're giving me great suggestions. I mean, for those of you who are paid members, you know that we have a fun daily conversation on Hopium. If you're not a paid member, unfortunately, you don't have access to the discussions that we're having there all the time. But yeah, I'm reading these things. Yeah, so Claudia asks, I see the polls in Ohio show that yes, that no, so no is winning. We can win the no vote and we can win the ballot initiative in November. We know that from polling, but Democrats have to turn out. And so this is a turnout game now in Ohio. And these kinds of texting and phone calling and canvassing and postcarding and all this are very effective at reaching Democrats and turning out Democrats and pushing Democratic turnout through the roof. I know somebody had asked earlier about, how we need to get back to canvassing, and I'm not really there on that anymore. I think that what we need to do as Democrats is we need to allow all of you to do things that are most comfortable for you and how you reach voters. And if some of you don't want to canvass, that's fine. If you want to write lots of postcards to Democrats and talk to other Democrats using postcards, that's great. If you want to make phone calls and text, that's great. If it's something you're comfortable doing, you're going to do more of it. And that's the most important thing. And I think these days where I call it the tyranny of canvassing, where the only legitimate activity is canvassing, that's over. That's just not true anymore. That's not how we push turnout through the roof in 2022. We did it through a variety of all these means. And the key is that because of Zoom, the barrier to entry for engagement in American politics has been dramatically lowered. And we now have hundreds of thousands, even millions of people who are doing work for us every day. I mean, I speak to groups 2 to 3 times a week. It's amazing. Hundreds of people in gatherings all the time, all over the country, who are giving a little bit of their time every week to do the good work for the Democrats. And so, I think it has to be all the above. I'm an all the above guy. I mean, there are just some people that all they can do is do postcards. So what are you going to do? Tell them not to do that? It's silly. I mean, we need everybody to do all that they can. And I have been also convinced by the postcarding that I've seen is that it becomes a gateway for activism where people start doing other things too. They get comfortable in this process of becoming an activist. We don't need 10,000 people doing the work in this election. We need 1 million people, 2 million people. We have to have a different understanding and open up in our mind's eye what it means to be a patriot who loves their country, to take actions every day. We got to give money. We got to do all this stuff. We got to do all of it, and it's not a choice. And I know that that's new thinking for the Democratic Party. Let me just see. Yeah, I mean, Gwen, I just want to say this comes up, and I wrote a whole piece on this. Any of the analysis of 2022 that doesn't acknowledge there were 2 different elections is illegitimate. The Pew data is illegitimate. I actually had significant dialogue with the Pew people about not putting that out because it was, in my view, it was misleading, because it's not possible. There's no way to look at what happened in 2022 and conclude anything other than we kicked everybody's ass and it was an incredible election for us. And the way you get there is if you take the national numbers. And so there's a piece on my site called there was no red wave in 2022. And I sort of debunk the recent Pew stuff. And yeah, that's being used by people to try to argue that there was actually a red wave in 2022. I don't know if any of you noticed, but there wasn't a red wave in 2022, right? We gained governorships, and the whole concept of a wave is that it has to happen everywhere. And the truth is, in the states that mattered, our performance was at the upper end of what was possible. We did better in the early vote than in 2018, 2020. Young people voted in very high numbers in the battleground, right? There were 2 different elections. And that's because of the power of our grassroots, the money we're raising. We've built these modern campaigns that now can absorb all this labor that comes in from all of the country, does the canvassing in the state that we need to do. We have these huge new muscles. The Democratic grassroots has never been stronger than it is now. And I think it's going to be even stronger still based on all the engagement I'm having with all of you. I mean, I'm speaking to groups that are still meeting on a weekly basis. Some are meeting on a daily basis. I mean, they didn't take any time off after the election. It's incredible, the passion and the intensity that I'm seeing in this country right now. It's so exhilarating. It's the whole reason I started Hopium, because I was convinced that there was something really important happening in our country. There was, we aren't doing protest rallies like in Israel. We're doing, people are going to work using these remote technologies and having a huge impact all across the country. And so I'm really proud of all of you. I mean, part of what I do whenever I go into these discussions and these talks, I always start by saying the same thing, which is thank you. Thank you for giving a shit about your country and taking steps to make sure your democracy doesn't slip away. I mean, we did well in 2022. This was a bottom-up election win. It wasn't a top-down one, right? And, I just think that we have to do more to talk about the significance of what's happening with our grassroots. I mean, the fact that we outraised Republican candidates 4, 5, 6 to 1 in these battleground states is unimaginable. I mean, we have unimaginably large campaigns now that can go. And let me just say about the early vote, and I should have mentioned this earlier. When I spoke to Network Nova on Saturday, I said, listen, I don't have a lot of advice to those of you in Virginia. You guys have done really well over the last 20 years, and you you have to run elections every year. But I do have one thing that I want to put out there, which is that I think we as a national party have to start talking about not just voting early, but voting on day one. Let me talk about this. This is important for all of you. What happens now, and one of the reasons our performance is hitting the upper end of what's possible, is that we used to only do turnout on election day. And now we've embraced the early vote. And what that means is that 12 days out, 13 days out, when you vote on day one, you come off the GOTV rolls. And it means that the campaign now is moving on to voters who are what are called lower propensity voters. They don't vote as much. On our voter file, everyone has a voter score of how likely they are to vote. And what it used to be is that we would hit all of our high propensity voters in the morning on election day and then hit them in the low propensity in the afternoon on election day. We're now hitting lower propensity voters and sort of medium propensity voters 10 days out, 11 days out. And so by you voting on day one and getting all of your friends to vote on day one, you're going to increase Democratic turnout and Democratic performance, because our massive campaigns are now going in and reaching secondary and tertiary GOTV targets that we could never reach before, that we just didn't have the mechanism to reach. And that's why what was among the most remarkable things that happened in 2022 was that we did better in the early vote than we did in 2018 and 2020, two elections where we did much better than in this election. And if you listen to Republicans, right, what do they talk about? The number one universal analysis about why they didn't do better was our strong performance in the early vote and their weak performance. And that's why in Virginia, for example, Governor Youngkin has already set up a campaign, as has the National RNC, to start getting Republicans to vote early again, because they saw what a huge advantage. For our party that has more voters, but more lower propensity voters and more irregular voters, this embrace of the early vote is a transformative event for us as a party. And so we have to understand now that in every election, if you want to be a good Democrat, you vote on day one. And you vote on day one, you automatically guarantee higher turnout, higher performance, more likely we are to win. This is a huge change. And one of the reasons that we can go into secondary and tertiary targets is because, 10,000, 50,000 people, whatever it is, are going to call into Virginia over the next 10 weeks from outside of Virginia and push our lower propensity Democrats to go vote. And so this system we're building, what I call this virtuous cycle of participation, has become a superpower for us. And it's another reason why I'm so confident that we're going to do well in this next election. Let me just see if I can get, hey, Matthew, congratulations on starting your Substack. Welcome to being a Substacker. I'll definitely link to it on my Substack. Let me just see if there's any other questions. Let me go to, I think Thornton's had his question up. I'm going to call on Thornton. Go ahead, Thornton. I'm calling you into our discussion here. You have your hand raised. Are you still there? Did I lose you? You can unmute if you want. Okay, let me go back to the written questions. And good to hear from you, Thornton. I know you've been active on the Hopium site. So Jay asks about the national efforts to register young people and Laura Brill. So I think those of you in Arizona may have met Laura Brill through me, and because I spoke to the Civic Engagement Beyond Voting group a few months ago, and I also had Laura on here. Let me tell you my view about what's going to happen with this my hope that we have a national youth voter registration drive. I think it's going to happen. I think the Biden and the DNC, the Biden campaign and the DNC will do it. I think it's just the data is so clear. I think I didn't mention earlier, but I've done this analysis called Get to 55, and at the core of it is that if you leave everything constant from 2020 to 2024, and just the same vote, and you change one thing, which is you get people under 45 to vote at the same level as their population distribution, right? Which is not a crazy thing. Biden wins by 10 points, right? And so the power of getting more young people to vote is among the most powerful things that we have at our disposal, one of the most powerful tools. Young people don't vote more because voting is actually very hard in America. We are one of the only countries in the world that has voter registration. Most countries, you're 18, you can vote immediately anywhere. We also have this place-based voting, which for people who are moving around a lot, we know from sociological research, is a barrier for their participation in voting. But we also know that Gen Z is the most politically engaged generation of modern generations based on longitudinal polling. And youth turnout was very high in the last several elections, and the performance for Democrats was very high. My hope is, though, that we have an all of the above strategy. And I think the Laura Brill strategy of trying to register every high school student in America is brilliant. And I've been promoting her incessantly since I met her and learned what she was doing. 35 states, if you can watch her video on the Hopium site or go to her site at the Civic Center, I encourage all of you to think about this. One of our collective projects, what happened in Arizona the other night, is Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, this remarkable group, committed to launch a drive to register every high school student in Arizona. Laura came on to do the opening, and there were 150 people on this call to launch this campaign of adopting high schools and getting people to go register their peers in high schools. My daughter is going to do it in her high school this year. And part of what Laura learned two really important things. One is that young people who are registered to vote at the same levels as older people who are registered. They're just registered at a lower rate. So turnout issues with young people who are registered are actually pretty good. So then what do? We have to get more registered, right? The second thing is that the insight that she had was that, many high schools have Republican and Democratic clubs. They have national service requirements. There's built-in structures. And what she learned, and she found this in her research, is that 35 states allow you to register at 17 or younger. In DC, for example, in Virginia, you can register at 16. So you have this, doing registration drives like this means that you can be registering people a year before they actually vote, or 6 months before they actually vote. The pool of registration is actually, you would think in a high school, how many people can really register to vote? Actually, an awful lot can, because many states have, including red states, have made it easy for people to register at 17 or younger, which is a smart thing to do, right? You want people to vote. We just haven't been building our politics around that, and we have to do that. And so for those of you who want to do something about youth voter registration, don't want to wait, go learn about Laura's work at the Civic Center. You can easily replicate the kind of program she has in any high school in the country. And it really should be the case, but by the end of this year, there should be a youth-based contact in every important high school in the country for the Democrats. There's no reason we can't do that. And it's, people get community service credit, Democratic clubs can do it. We just didn't understand how important this is. We've never, because in part, young people are still at the kids' table in our party, and we need to make young people the center of everything we do. This is a really essential thing we have to do. And I think we can have a really great election with young people, even though we have an older president. because the things they care about are very stark. I mean, today, Greg Sargent, the Washington Post, I'm going to be putting this on Hopium today, did an interview with John Della Volpe, who I also had on just recently from Harvard to talk about youth voting. And, you know, on the issues that really matter, climate change, right? Guns, you know, the economy, abortion, these are issues that break among young people, 60, 30, 70, you know, 60, 30, 70, 20 among young people towards the Democrats. Young people are aligned with us. They may not be registering as Democrats as much. I'm not as worried about that. I'm more because you know, I pointed out in a poll that Civics did last week that for people ages 18 to 34, the Republican Party's favorabilities are 28.73 minus 55. That means for 70% of people 18 to 34, the Republican Party is not available to them. It's not available to them. It's not an option for them. So, you know, we got to take a big swing here, right? I mean, that's the goal. And listen, thanks everybody. You all, I appreciate it. We try to stay to the hour. For those of you who are paid Hopium members with me tonight, thank you for supporting this work. For those of you who are not, I hope you'll become a paid Hopium member. You get a little bit more of Simon and Hopium every month. And you also help fund this important work that we're doing here. And I just want to say thanks, everybody. I mean, I just will conclude by saying, remember, I'd much rather be us than them. We are on track to have a very good election. We have to keep our heads down and keep doing the work. And we have to be very conscious about spreading more positive information in our daily discourse. It's really important. We have more power in determining the daily conversation in America than we understand. And 1 million people, you know, redesigning the war room, that it's 1 million, 2 million people every day and not 20 sweaty kids in Red Bulls, drinking Red Bulls, you know, we can change the future. And that's my final point is, what is Hopium? I get asked all the time. Hopium is hope with a plan. In 2022, we had hope that we would do well in the election, but we had more than hope. We went to work and we changed the outcome of the election through the money we gave and all the work that we did. We need to keep that sense that we have the power to control our own destiny as Democrats and as proud patriots. The country's on our side. It's a majority, you know, the Democratic Party is the majority party in America. But we all know the obstacles, but let's not dwell there. Let's just run over them. Let's go kick their butt. Let's get to 55. Let's do it together. Thanks everybody so much. And if you think anyone would like to hear this video, it'll be up on the Hopium site on Wednesday, and you can share it with others. And thanks everybody. Have a good night. And thanks for all that you do.